October 12, 1944. Hurtgen Forest, Germany. 0500 hours. The fog hung so thick between the pine trees that Obergefreiter Klaus Richter could barely see his hand in front of his face. His platoon from the 275th Infantry Division had been ordered to probe American positions near the village of Germeter. Intelligence assured them the Americans were green replacements, recently arrived National Guard units with no combat experience. What Klaus and his comrades didn't know was that among those supposedly inexperienced Americans stood a Kentucky coal miner named Jack Mitchell, holding a rifle that German intelligence would have dismissed as a hunting weapon, a .30 caliber Model 1903 Springfield with a commercial Lyman scope, the same rifle Jack had used to put venison on his family's table during the Depression. By nightfall, that deer rifle would account for 42 German soldiers, and Jack Mitchell would have rewritten the mathematics of what one man with the right weapon could accomplish. The story begins not in the Hurtgen Forest, but in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, where Jack Mitchell had learned to shoot before he learned to read. Born in 1921 in Harlan County, Jack grew up in a world where marksmanship wasn't a sport, but a survival skill. His father, a coal miner who worked underground 6 days a week, had given him the Springfield when Jack turned 12 years old. "That's a working rifle," his father had told him. "You don't waste ammunition. One shot, one deer. We can't afford to miss." Jack had taken that lesson to heart. By the time he was 16 years old, he was known throughout 3 counties as the boy who never missed. Local legend claimed he once killed a deer at 800 yards, though Jack himself never confirmed or denied the story. He simply went into the mountains when his family needed meat, and he always came back with it. The Springfield he carried had been manufactured in 1908 at the Springfield Armory. It was one of the original military rifles, a bolt-action design that had served American soldiers in the First World War. After the war, thousands of these rifles had been sold as surplus to civilians. Jack's father had purchased it in 1932 for $15, an enormous sum during the Depression, but he considered it an investment in his family's survival. The rifle fired the standard .30-06 cartridge, the same ammunition used by the military's M1903A3 and the Browning automatic rifle. But Jack's rifle had been modified with a commercial Lyman scope, a 5-power magnification optic that was far superior to anything the military issued. Jack had saved for 3 years to buy that scope, working weekends at the mine when he should have been in school. The scope cost him $22.50. He considered it the best money he ever spent. When Jack registered for the draft in 1940, he listed his occupation as coal miner and hunter. The draft board classified him 1A, eligible for military service, but didn't call him up immediately. Mining was considered essential war work. It wasn't until June of 1943 that his number finally came up. Jack reported to Fort Knox for basic training, bringing his Springfield with him. The drill sergeant, a career soldier named William Oakes, who had fought in the First World War, took one look at Jack's rifle and shook his head. "That's not regulation, son. You'll be issued an M1 Garand like everyone else." Jack nodded, but didn't argue. He went through basic training with the standard issue M1, and he qualified as expert, the highest marksmanship rating, but his scores weren't exceptional. The M1 was a fine weapon, but it wasn't his rifle. It didn't fit his shoulder the way the Springfield did. He couldn't feel the trigger break the same way. After basic training, Jack was assigned to the 28th Infantry Division, a Pennsylvania National Guard unit that was being filled out with replacements. The 28th had fought in World War I and had been federalized in February 1941. By the time Jack joined them in September 1943, they were preparing for deployment to Europe. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Bradley commanded the battalion that Jack was assigned to. Bradley was a lawyer from Pittsburgh who had been in the National Guard for 15 years. He was a competent officer, but he had never been in combat. When Jack approached him with a request that seemed absurd on its face, Bradley's first instinct was to refuse. "Sir, I'd like permission to carry my personal rifle in combat," Jack said. "The Springfield." Bradley looked at the young private standing before him. Son, the Army issues weapons for a reason. We have standardization, interchangeable parts, common ammunition. Your personal rifle doesn't fit into that system. Jack persisted. Sir, with respect, the ammunition is the same. The 30-06 round is standard, and my rifle is more accurate than anything the Army issues. I can shoot. I mean really shoot. Bradley studied Jack for a long moment. Every soldier thinks he can shoot, Private. What makes you different? I don't think I can shoot, sir. I know I can. I grew up hunting to survive. My family ate what I killed. I never missed because we couldn't afford for me to miss. Bradley made a decision that would later be called either brilliant or insane, depending on who was telling the story. All right, Private Mitchell, I'll make you a deal. We're going to the range tomorrow. You take your Springfield, and I'll bring the best marksman in the battalion. If you can outshoot him, you can carry your personal rifle. But if you lose, you turn it in, and I never want to hear about it again. The next morning, Jack faced off against Sergeant Thomas Garrett, the battalion's champion shooter. Garrett had won division-level competitions and was considered the finest marksman in the 28th Division. The competition was simple, 10 shots at 500 yards. Garrett shot first, using the standard M1903A3 sniper rifle with military scope. He placed 8 shots in the black with 2 in the 9 ring. It was excellent shooting. Jack stepped up with his Springfield. His father's rifle with the Lyman scope that he'd bought with money earned in the mines. He worked the bolt smoothly, the action worn smooth by 35 years of use. The rifle felt like an extension of his body. He fired 10 shots without hurrying. When the target was examined, all 10 bullets had passed through the same hole. The group measured less than 2 inches. Bradley stared at the target in silence. Then he turned to Jack. Private Mitchell, you just earned yourself the right to carry that rifle. But understand this, if you carry it, you'll be expected to use it. And I mean really use it, Jack nodded. That's all I'm asking for, sir. The 28th Infantry Division landed at Omaha Beach on July 22, 1944. They moved inland through the Normandy hedgerows, experiencing combat for the first time. Jack's marksmanship quickly became legendary within the battalion. While other soldiers fired dozens of rounds in firefights, Jack would fire once or twice, and Germans would fall. His weapon became both respected and resented. The M1 Garand, the standard American infantry rifle, was a technological marvel. It was semi-automatic, gas-operated, and held 8 rounds in an en-bloc clip. It could fire as fast as a soldier could pull the trigger, but its effective range was limited to 300 to 400 yards, and its accuracy at longer ranges was questionable. Jack Springfield was the opposite. It held only 5 rounds, loaded one at a time or via stripper clips. It required manual operation of the bolt after each shot. But it was accurate to 800 yards or more in the right hands, and Jack's hands were definitely the right hands. The trade-off was clear: volume of fire versus precision, and in Jack's hands, precision was winning. By September 1944, the 28th Division had fought through France and was approaching the German border. They had taken casualties, but they had also learned how to fight. Jack Mitchell had become something of a legend. Other soldiers would seek him out before patrols, wanting him along. They felt safer knowing he was watching over them. The Germans had noticed him too. Snipers on both sides were priority targets. The Wehrmacht trained their soldiers to look for the distinctive crack of a sniper rifle and to immediately suppress the source. But Jack was different from most snipers. He didn't stay in one position. He fired 1 or 2 shots, then moved. By the time the Germans had located his previous position, he was already somewhere else. The Hurtgen Forest was a different kind of hell. 17 miles long and 10 miles wide, it was a dense pine forest on the German-Belgian border. The forest floor was carpeted with pine needles that muffled sound. Visibility was measured in yards, not hundreds of yards. The Germans had prepared defensive positions for months, and they knew every tree and trail. The American plan was to push through the forest and reach the Roer River. It seemed simple on maps. In reality, it would become one of the bloodiest battles American forces fought in Europe. The 28th Division attacked into the Hurtgen on November 2, 1944. They made minimal progress against fierce German resistance. The forest turned artillery and mortar fire into deadly tree bursts. The Germans fought from prepared bunkers and log fortifications that were nearly invisible until you were right on top of them. Jack found the forest frustrating. His long-range marksmanship advantage meant nothing when visibility was measured in yards. He could shoot 800 yards in open country, but in the Hurtgen, he could barely see 80 yards. The Springfield's bolt action became a liability when Germans attacked at close range. The M1's rapid fire was better suited to this kind of fighting, but Lieutenant Colonel Bradley had a different idea. Jack, you're wasted in assault operations. I want you working as a scout and sniper. Get ahead of our lines, find good positions, and make the Germans afraid to show themselves. Jack nodded. That's what I do best, sir. Now, if you're finding this story fascinating, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We dive deep into incredible true stories from military history that most people have never heard. Don't miss out on these amazing accounts of courage and skill. On October 11th, 1944, Jack's platoon was ordered to establish a defensive position on the eastern edge of a small clearing near Germeter. Intelligence reported that German forces were planning a counterattack in the sector. The Americans were to dig in and hold. Jack studied the terrain carefully. The clearing was roughly 300 yards across, with dense forest on all sides. There was a slight rise on the American side that provided good observation of the entire clearing and the forest edge beyond. It was perfect sniper country. He set up his position in a partially fallen tree on the rise. The tree had been hit by artillery and had fallen at an angle, creating a natural hide. He piled pine boughs around himself for concealment and cleared narrow shooting lanes through the branches. His field of fire covered the entire clearing and extended into the forest beyond for another 100 yards. If the Germans attacked across the clearing, they would be exposed. If they tried to infiltrate through the forest, he could cover the most likely approaches. Jack settled in with his Springfield, 5-round stripper clips lined up beside him, and a full ammunition belt with 60 additional rounds. It was more ammunition than he usually carried. Most days he might fire 5 to 10 shots. But something about this position, this clearing, this setup, told him he might need more. The attack came at dawn on October 12th. The Germans had massed elements of the 275th Infantry Division, a unit that had been rushed from the Eastern Front to defend against the American advance. These were combat veterans, not the green recruits that had been filling out German units lately. They knew how to fight. The initial German probe came at 0500 hours, just as the first gray light filtered through the fog. A squad of German soldiers, 10 men moving in extended formation, emerged from the fog at the far edge of the clearing. They moved cautiously, professionally, weapons ready. Jack watched them through his Lyman scope. At 250 yards, they were well within his range, but he held his fire. He wanted to see their plan, their strength, their tactics. The German squad crossed halfway across the clearing, then dropped into cover in the scattered stumps and debris. They were establishing a base of fire position to cover the next wave. Standard infantry tactics. Jack made his decision. If he let them establish that position, they would make his job much harder. He selected his first target, the squad leader who was directing his men into position. The crosshairs settled on the center of the man's chest. Jack's finger took up the slack on the trigger. The trigger broke cleanly, as it had 10,000 times before. The Springfield roared. At 250 yards, the .30-06 bullet took less than a third of a second to reach its target. The German squad leader dropped without a sound. His men immediately hit the dirt, looking for the source of the shot. But Jack was already working the bolt, ejecting the spent case and chambering a fresh round. He found his second target, a soldier who was trying to crawl to the fallen leader. Another shot, another German down. The remaining Germans opened fire, but they were shooting blindly into the American positions. They hadn't located Jack. He was too well concealed, and his position was far enough from the main American line that they were looking in the wrong place. Jack fired his third shot, and a third German fell. Now the survivors broke. They jumped up and ran for the forest, abandoning their dead. Jack tracked the fleeing soldiers with his scope, firing as fast as he could work the bolt. 2 more Germans went down before the others disappeared into the trees. 5 shots, 5 Germans killed. The clearing was silent again. Lieutenant Robert Hayes, Jack's platoon commander, crawled over to his position. "Jesus, Mitchell, you just wiped out an entire squad." Jack was reloading his rifle with a stripper clip, pressing 5 fresh cartridges down into the magazine. "They were probing, sir. There'll be more." Hayes nodded. "Battalion says we can expect a major attack this morning, probably company strength or larger. You just make sure you've got enough ammunition." The next German attack came 30 minutes later. This time they weren't subtle. A full platoon, approximately 40 men, emerged from the forest at a run. They were trying to cross the clearing in a rush, hoping speed would carry them through before the Americans could react. It was a sound tactic against most defenders. But they weren't facing most defenders. Jack had reloaded completely and he was ready. The Germans were charging directly toward his position, which put them in the perfect position for enfilade fire. He could shoot down the length of their formation. He started at the front and worked backward. The leading German fell at 220 yards. The second shot dropped another soldier at 230 yards. The Germans kept coming, firing as they ran, but their accuracy was poor. Running and shooting is difficult even for well-trained soldiers. Jack worked the bolt smoothly, mechanically. Aim, breath, squeeze, cycle the bolt. Aim again. His father's words echoed in his mind. 1 shot, 1 deer. Don't waste ammunition. Except these weren't deer. These were men trying to kill his friends. The moral calculation was simple in Jack's mind. Every German he stopped was one that wouldn't reach the American lines. One that wouldn't kill an American soldier. The German charge broke when they were halfway across the clearing. Too many men were falling, and the survivors couldn't identify the source of the deadly fire. They went to ground, taking cover behind stumps and in shallow depressions. But there was no good cover in the clearing. Jack could see them clearly through his scope. What happened next would be debated for years. Was it massacre or was it war? Jack continued firing at any German who moved, who tried to shift position, who attempted to crawl forward or backward. His Springfield cracked repeatedly. The bolt worked smoothly, and Germans died. Some tried to surrender, standing with hands raised. Jack held his fire on those men. He wasn't a murderer. But the Americans couldn't safely take prisoners in the middle of a battle, and telling the Germans to stay put required exposing themselves. The situation was impossible. After 10 minutes, the surviving Germans made another rush, this time back toward the forest they had come from. Jack dropped 3 more before the remainder reached the trees. He counted 14 bodies in the clearing. The Springfield's barrel was hot to the touch. Sergeant Hayes crawled back over. "How much ammunition have you got left?" Jack checked. 2 clips, 10 rounds. "I've gone through 50 rounds. Hayes whistled softly. 50 rounds, and the clearing is covered with dead Germans. Battalion's going to want to know about this." The third German attack came an hour later, and it was the most dangerous. The Germans had finally figured out approximately where Jack was positioned, and they brought mortar fire down on the American positions. Jack was forced to abandon his carefully prepared hide and move to a secondary position. He had already scouted 30 yards to the south. The Germans attacked under cover of their own mortar fire. It was well coordinated, professional. These were experienced soldiers using proper combined arms tactics. But they were still crossing the same killing ground, and Jack was still watching. From his new position, he had a slightly different angle. The Germans were moving in short rushes, using fire and movement tactics. They would be harder to hit. But Jack had been shooting moving targets his entire life. A running deer at 300 yards is a difficult shot. A running man at the same distance is actually easier. Men run in predictable patterns. Jack began picking off Germans as they moved. It was harder than his earlier shooting. The targets were moving, and they were only exposed for seconds at a time. But his hit rate was still extraordinary. Out of 15 shots, he recorded 12 hits. The German attack stalled again. They had taken too many casualties, lost too many leaders, and the psychological impact of accurate long-range fire was breaking their morale. A soldier can handle machine gun fire. It's impersonal, random. But sniper fire is different. It's personal. Someone is aiming specifically at you, choosing you, killing you. And when that fire is unerringly accurate, when soldiers watch their comrades fall one after another to shots they can't even locate, it destroys unit cohesion. By noon, the Germans had pulled back. The clearing and the forest edge beyond were littered with their dead. American medics would later count 42 German bodies in Jack's sector of fire. Some had been killed by other American soldiers, by machine guns and rifles. But Jack's platoon mates insisted that the vast majority were Jack's kills. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley personally visited Jack's position that afternoon. He stood looking at the carnage in the clearing, then turned to Jack. "How many rounds did you fire today, Private?" Jack had been counting. 78, sir. And how many did you hit?" Jack hesitated. "I don't know, sir. Every time I fired, I was aiming at a German. Whether they all went down from my shots or from someone else's, I can't say." Bradley nodded. "Your platoon mates are saying you killed 42 Germans today with a deer rifle." Jack looked uncomfortable. "Sir, it's a good rifle, and I've been shooting it since I was 12 years old. It's not the rifle, Private. It's the shooter." Bradley looked at the Springfield Jack was holding. "That rifle's been in how many battles now?" Jack thought about it. "Since Normandy, sir. Every one. And how many times has it jammed or failed?" "Never, sir. It's never failed." Bradley smiled slightly. "The Army would say that's impossible. A civilian rifle with 30-plus years of use, subjected to combat conditions, should have failed by now. But it hasn't. Do you know why?" Jack shook his head. Bradley continued, "Because you take care of it. You clean it obsessively. You check every round before you load it. You maintain that rifle like your life depends on it." "Because it does. That's the difference between you and most soldiers, Private. They treat their rifle as a tool issued by the Army. You treat yours as a partner." Jack nodded. "My father taught me that, sir. He said a man's rifle is his responsibility. If it fails, it's because he failed it, not the other way around." Before we continue with the rest of Jack's incredible story, I want to ask you to do something. If you're enjoying this deep dive into real military history, please hit that subscribe button right now. We work hard to bring you these detailed, accurate accounts that honor the people who lived through these events. Your subscription helps us continue creating this content. Thanks for your support. The aftermath of October 12th, 1944 was complicated for Jack Mitchell. On one hand, he had single-handedly stopped multiple German attacks, saving American lives and holding a crucial position. On the other hand, his extraordinary kill count raised uncomfortable questions. The American military in World War II didn't glorify individual killing the way some armies did. The emphasis was on teamwork, unit cohesion, combined arms. A soldier who killed dozens of enemies in a single day didn't fit neatly into that framework. Captain John Roberts, the battalion intelligence officer, interviewed Jack extensively about the day's events. The Army wanted to understand exactly what had happened, to determine if there were lessons that could be applied more broadly. Could other soldiers be trained to be as effective? Were there equipment changes that could help? Roberts's report was detailed and clinical. He noted that Jack's success came from a combination of factors: exceptional marksmanship skill developed over years of hunting, an extraordinarily accurate rifle that Jack knew intimately, excellent position selection and concealment, patience to let targets come to him rather than forcing shots. Most importantly, Roberts noted, the psychological effect of sustained accurate fire on enemy morale. The Germans facing Jack Mitchell had been, in Roberts's words, terrorized by an invisible enemy who killed with mechanical precision. German documents captured later confirmed this. A report from the 275th Infantry Division described the October 12th attack as encountering unexpected specialized sniper fire of extraordinary accuracy. Unit cohesion was severely degraded by casualties among leaders and NCOs. Attack was suspended due to prohibitive casualties and deteriorating morale. The German command had no idea they were facing a single rifleman with a deer hunting rifle. They assumed they had run into a team of highly trained military snipers with specialized equipment. The idea that one man with a 36-year-old commercial rifle could cause such carnage never occurred to them. Jack's fame spread through the 28th Division and beyond. Other units heard about the coal miner from Kentucky with his personal rifle who had killed more than 40 Germans in one day. Some soldiers sought him out, wanting to see the legendary deer rifle. Jack was uncomfortable with the attention. "I'm not a hero," he told one reporter who interviewed him for Stars and Stripes. "I'm just a soldier doing my job. My job is to shoot straight, and I do it. The rifle helps, but any good shot could do what I do." But that wasn't true, and Jack knew it. Not every good shot could do what he did. The combination of his lifetime of hunting experience, his intimate knowledge of his specific rifle, and his mental composure under fire was rare. The Army tried to study what made Jack Mitchell so effective, but they couldn't replicate it. You couldn't train someone to have 20 years of hunting experience. You couldn't issue a 36-year-old rifle that a soldier had fired 10,000 rounds through and knew by feel. The American military's sniper program in World War II was relatively underdeveloped compared to programs in other armies. The Germans and Soviets both had sophisticated sniper training and specialized equipment. The Americans, by contrast, had initially paid little attention to sniping. This changed as the war progressed and the value of skilled marksmen became apparent. The standard American sniper rifle was the M1903A4, a modified Springfield with a Weaver 2.5 power scope. It was effective, but it wasn't as accurate as the best German or Soviet sniper rifles. And it certainly wasn't as accurate as Jack Mitchell's personally modified Springfield with its superior Lyman scope. Some officers suggested that the Army should contract with civilian rifle manufacturers to produce hunting rifles for military snipers. The accuracy potential was clearly superior. But the logistics were impossible. The Army needed standardization, interchangeable parts, and large-scale production. Custom hunting rifles couldn't meet those requirements. Jack Mitchell remained an anomaly, a one-of-a-kind soldier with a one-of-a-kind weapon. The Hurtgen Forest battle continued into December 1944. It became a nightmare of casualties and minimal progress. The 28th Division was eventually pulled out of the line, having suffered devastating losses. The division had gone into the Hurtgen with approximately 14,000 men. They came out with less than 6,000 combat-effective soldiers. Jack Mitchell survived, though he came close to dying several times. On November 18th, a German artillery shell landed 10 yards from his position. The tree he was hiding behind saved his life, but the concussion knocked him unconscious and perforated his eardrums. He was evacuated to a field hospital and was deaf for 3 weeks. When his hearing partially returned, he begged to return to his unit. The doctors wanted to send him to a rear area assignment, arguing that his damaged hearing would make him ineffective in combat. But Jack insisted that he could still shoot, still see, still do his job. He was returned to the 28th Division in late December, just in time for the Battle of the Bulge. The German offensive that began on December 16, 1944, caught American forces by surprise. The 28th Division, still recovering from the Hurtgen Forest, was hit hard by the initial assault. Jack's unit was pushed back, fighting desperate defensive actions. During the retreat, Jack's Springfield proved its value again. The Germans were advancing rapidly, and American units needed to buy time for defensive lines to be established. Jack and a handful of other soldiers volunteered to act as a rear guard, delaying the German advance. From a church steeple in a small Belgian village, Jack engaged German tanks and infantry at long range. He couldn't stop tanks with his rifle, but he could kill tank commanders who exposed themselves from their hatches. Without commanders, the tanks became less effective, more cautious, slower. He killed 3 tank commanders in one afternoon, forcing the German armor to button up and advance more carefully. This bought precious time for American forces to withdraw and establish new positions. The Springfield took its first combat damage during this action. A German bullet struck the wooden stock, splintering it, but not breaking it completely. Jack wrapped the stock with wire from a telephone line and continued firing. The rifle still functioned perfectly. By January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. The German offensive had been stopped and then reversed. American forces were advancing again, now pushing into Germany itself. Jack Mitchell had been in combat for 6 months, and he had fired his Springfield hundreds of times. He had stopped counting his confirmed kills after the first 100. It didn't matter to him anymore. The numbers were just numbers. What mattered was that his rifle still worked, he was still alive, and he was still protecting the men around him. In March 1945, the 28th Division crossed the Rhine River and advanced into the heart of Germany. Resistance was collapsing, but there were still fanatical defenders who fought to the death. Jack's marksmanship remained crucial. He could identify and eliminate enemy strongpoints from distances that were safe for American forces. One afternoon in late March, Jack's unit was pinned down by a German machine gun position in a concrete bunker. The bunker had a narrow firing slit, and the machine gun was sweeping the American positions, making any movement suicidal. Artillery couldn't knock it out. The bunker was too strong. Infantry couldn't approach without being cut down. Jack studied the bunker through his scope. The firing slit was perhaps 8 inches tall and 2 feet wide. The machine gunner's silhouette was occasionally visible behind the slit, a flickering shadow at 400 yards. It was an almost impossible shot. Jack waited patiently. He knew the gunner would eventually shift position, would expose himself more clearly for just a second. It took 20 minutes, but it happened. The gunner leaned forward slightly to adjust his weapon, and for just an instant Jack could see his head and shoulders clearly in the scope. The Springfield cracked. The German machine gunner fell backward. The gun went silent. American forces assaulted and captured the bunker. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Jack Mitchell had survived. So had his Springfield. The rifle had fired an estimated 1,200 rounds in combat, had been through dozens of battles, and had never malfunctioned once. The stock was cracked and wrapped with wire. The bluing was worn off in places from constant handling, but the rifle still shot as accurately as it had on Jack's father's farm in Kentucky. After Germany's surrender, Jack was offered a discharge. He had enough points to go home, but he volunteered to stay in Germany as part of the occupation force. He felt responsible for his rifle, for seeing it through to the end properly. In July 1945, he finally shipped home. He was processed out at Fort Knox in August, the same place where he had reported for basic training 2 years earlier. The Army wanted to keep his Springfield. It was government property, they said. It had been manufactured at Springfield Armory, even if it had been sold as surplus. Jack refused. This rifle belonged to my father. He gave it to me. I carried it through a war, and it's going home with me. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley, who had authorized Jack to carry the Springfield in the first place, intervened. He cut through the red tape and made sure Jack kept his rifle. Take it home, Private. You earned it. And when people ask you about it, you tell them the truth. That rifle wasn't for deer. It was for defending freedom. Jack Mitchell returned to Harlan County, Kentucky, in September 1945. He went back to work in the coal mines. He married his high school sweetheart, Clara, who had waited for him. They had 4 children. Jack never talked much about the war. When his children asked about his medals, the Bronze Star and Purple Heart, in a box in the closet, he would say he did what was necessary and change the subject. The Springfield went back on the wall above the fireplace where it had hung before the war. Jack took it hunting occasionally, and every November he would bring home a deer for the family. 1 shot, 1 deer. He never wasted ammunition. In 1968, a military historian researching snipers in World War II tracked Jack down. He wanted to interview him about his experiences, particularly about the October 12th action. Jack was reluctant, but he finally agreed. The historian, Dr. Robert Williams, was fascinated by Jack's story. He had found references to Jack in various military records and had pieced together what had happened. But he wanted to hear it from Jack directly. They sat in Jack's small house in Kentucky, the spring field on the wall above them, and Jack told his story. When he finished, Williams was silent for a long moment. "You realize what you accomplished was extraordinary, don't you?" Jack shrugged. "I did my job. I was good at shooting, so I shot, that's all. But it wasn't just shooting. You fundamentally altered the outcome of multiple engagements. You saved lives. You shortened battles. One man with a deer rifle changed the calculus of combat." Jack looked up at the spring field. It was never about the rifle. The rifle was just a tool. It was about knowing the tool so well that it became part of you. My father taught me that. He taught me to respect the rifle, to maintain it, to understand it. That's what made the difference. Williams published his findings in a military history journal in 1970. Jack Mitchell, the Kentucky sniper who fought World War II with his father's deer rifle. The article attracted attention from other veterans and historians. Some people questioned the numbers. Could one man really have killed 42 Germans in one day? The official records were ambiguous, as battlefield kill counts often are. But the soldiers who had been there, who had fought alongside Jack, confirmed the essential truth. Jack Mitchell had been extraordinarily effective with his personal rifle, and on October 12, 1944, he had stopped multiple German attacks almost single-handedly. Jack Mitchell died in 1991 at the age of 70 years old. He had worked in the mines until he was 62, then retired. He spent his final years with his wife and grandchildren, teaching them to shoot, to hunt, to respect firearms as tools that required knowledge and responsibility. The Springfield was passed down to his oldest son, who still has it. It hangs on the wall of his house. The same rifle that Jack's father bought in 1932. The same rifle that Jack carried through World War II. The stock still has the wire wrapping from the bullet damage in Belgium. The metal still shows the wear from combat, but the rifle still works perfectly. In 2005, Jack's son was approached by a museum that wanted to display the rifle as part of an exhibit on American soldiers in World War II. He agreed, and the Springfield was displayed with a placard explaining its history. Thousands of people saw it and read the story of the coal miner from Kentucky who had fought a war with his deer rifle. The legend of Jack Mitchell raises important questions about warfare, about the role of the individual soldier, about the relationship between a warrior and his weapon. Modern military doctrine emphasizes standardization. Every soldier gets the same rifle, the same training, the same equipment. This makes sense from a logistics perspective. It's efficient, manageable, scalable. But Jack Mitchell's story suggests that something is lost in that standardization. Jack wasn't more effective because he had a better rifle than the M1 Garand. In many ways, the Garand was a superior weapon. It was semi-automatic, held more ammunition, and had been specifically designed for military use. But Jack was more effective with his Springfield because it was his Springfield. He knew every quirk of that particular rifle. He knew exactly where it would shoot at any given range. He knew the trigger pull by feel. He knew the balance and the recoil. That intimate knowledge, built up over years of use, made him more deadly than any amount of standardized training could have achieved. The modern military has recognized this to some extent. Special operations units allow more individualization of equipment. Snipers are given high-end rifles that they customize to their preferences. But regular infantry soldiers are still issued standardized weapons, and they're expected to perform with whatever they're given. Jack Mitchell's story suggests that there might be value in allowing soldiers more choice in their weapons, more time to develop mastery of a specific rifle. But that's probably not practical in a modern military. The logistics would be impossible. The training time would be prohibitive. And the sad truth is that modern wars chew through soldiers faster than they can develop that kind of intimate weapon knowledge. Jack Mitchell fought in a different kind of war, in a different era. He was part of the last generation of soldiers who had grown up hunting for food, who had learned marksmanship as a survival skill before they ever thought about military service. That background gave him skills that couldn't be replicated in training. The story of the deer rifle that killed 42 Germans in one day is ultimately a story about expertise, about the value of deep knowledge and practical skill. Jack Mitchell wasn't a hero because he killed a lot of enemy soldiers. He was a hero because he used his skills to protect his fellow American soldiers, to accomplish his mission, to do his job with extraordinary effectiveness. The rifle wasn't magic, it was a tool, but in the hands of someone who understood it completely, who had spent thousands of hours learning its capabilities and limitations, that tool became devastatingly effective. Every shot Jack Mitchell fired in combat was backed by years of experience, by intimate knowledge of his weapon, by a lifetime of practice. When people say it wasn't the rifle, it was the shooter, they're absolutely right. But they're also missing part of the truth. It was the shooter and the rifle together, the relationship between them, the thousands of hours of practice that had made the rifle an extension of Jack's body, the trust that came from never having the rifle fail him, the confidence that came from knowing exactly what he could do with that weapon. German soldiers who faced American forces in World War II respected American firepower. They knew the Americans had more artillery, more ammunition, more of everything, but they also learned to fear American marksmanship. German military doctrine had emphasized marksmanship training, but by 1944, training time had been cut drastically. German replacements were being sent to the front with minimal training. American soldiers, particularly those like Jack Mitchell who had grown up hunting, often had better practical shooting skills than their German opponents. The Germans never knew that on October 12, 1944, they were facing a single rifleman with a deer hunting rifle. They assumed they were up against a team of military snipers with specialized equipment. When they found out the truth after the war, through interviews and historical research, many refused to believe it. It seemed impossible. But it happened. One man, one rifle, one day. 42 Germans stopped. Multiple attacks defeated. A position held. The mathematics of warfare rewritten by a coal miner from Kentucky who had learned to shoot before he learned to read. Jack Mitchell's story reminds us that behind every military statistic, behind every casualty count and battle report, there are individual human beings making choices, using skills, fighting for their lives and for their comrades. The deer rifle that Jack carried wasn't supposed to be a weapon of war. It was supposed to put meat on the table for a struggling family during the Depression. But when war came, that rifle served its nation just as faithfully as its owner did. And that perhaps is the real lesson of Jack Mitchell's story, that we don't always get to choose what we'll be called upon to do, but we can choose to do it with skill, with courage, and with absolute commitment to excellence. They said his rifle was for deer, and it was, until the day it wasn't, until the day it became something more, until the day Jack Mitchell used it to change history, one carefully aimed shot at a time.